Good afternoon, boys and girls. I'm going to read chapter 3 of The Cricket in Times Square. So remember, we met Mario, who is the son, and he runs the newspaper stand for Mama and Papa Bellini. He also has Tucker Mouse that is in the subway station with him. We also met the Cricket in chapter 2. Remember, we also have Paul, who was a conductor on the subway station. So we're going to do chapter 3, Chester. Tucker Mouse had been watching the Bellinis and listening to what they said. Next to scrounging eavesdropping on human beings was what he enjoyed most. That was one of the reasons that he lived in the Times Square subway station. As soon as the family disappeared, he darted out across the floor and scooted up to the newsstand. At one side of the boards had separated, and there was a wide space that he could jump through. He'd been in a few times before, just exploring. For a moment he stood under the three-legged stool, letting his eyes get used to the darkness, and then he jumped on it. "Psst," he whispered. "Hey, you up there, are you awake?" There was no answer. "Psst, psst, hey," Tucker whispered again, louder this time. From the shelf above came a scuffling, like the little feet feeling their way to the edge. "Who is that going psst?" said the voice. "It is me," said Tucker, "down here on the stool." So here's our picture. Here's Tucker. Cricket's up here. A black head with two shiny black eyes appeared down at him. "Well, who are you?" "Well, I'm a mouse," said Tucker. "And who are you?" "Oh, well, I'm Chester Cricket," said the Cricket, and he had a high musical voice. Everything he said seemed to be spoken to an unheard melody. "Well, my name's Tucker," said Tucker Mouse. "Can I come up?" "Well, I guess so," said Chester Cricket. "This isn't my house anyway." So Tucker jumped up beside the Cricket and looked at him. "A cricket?" he said admiringly. "So you're a cricket. I never saw one of you before." "Well, I've seen mice before," the Cricket said. "I knew quite a few back in Connecticut." "Well, is that where you're from?" asked Tucker. "Yes, I guess I'll never see it again," said Chester wistfully. "Well, how did you get to New York?" asked Tucker Mouse. "Oh, it's a long story," sighed the Cricket. "Well, tell me," said Tucker, settling back on his haunches. That means his hind legs. He loved to hear stories. It was almost as much fun as eavesdropping, if the story was true. "Well, it must have been 3 days ago," Chester Cricket began. "I was sitting on top of my stump, just enjoying the weather and thinking how nice that it was that summer had started. I live near an old tree stump next to a willow tree, and I often go up to the roof to look around. And I'd been practicing jumping that day, too. On the other side of the stump from the willow tree, there's a brook that runs past, and I'd been jumping back and forth across it to get my legs in condition for the summer. I do a lot of jumping, you know." "Me too," said Tucker.
especially around the rush hour. And I had just finished jumping when I smelled something. Oh, liverwurst. I wish. You like liverwurst? Tucker broke in. Wait, just wait. And in one leap, he sprang down all the way from the shelf to the floor and dashed over to his drain pipe. Chester shook his head as he watched him go. He thought Tucker was a very excitable person, even for a mouse. And inside the drain pipe, Tucker's nest was a jumble of papers and scraps of cloth and buttons and lost jewelry, small change, and everything else that can be picked up in the subway station. Tucker tossed things left and right in a wild search. Neatness was not one of the things that he aimed at in life. At last, he discovered what he has been looking for, a big piece of liverwurst that he had found earlier in the evening. It was meant to be for breakfast tomorrow, but he decided that meeting his first cricket was a special occasion. Holding the liverwurst between his teeth, he whisked back to the newsstand. "Look," he said proudly, dropping the meat in front of Chester Cricket. "Liverwurst, you continue with the story and then we'll enjoy the snack." "Oh, that's very nice of you," said Chester, and he was touched that the mouse he had only known for a few minutes would share his food with him. "Well, I had chocolate before, but besides that, nothing for 3 days." "Well, eat, said Tucker, and he bit into the liverwurst and cut it into 2 pieces. He gave Chester the bigger one. "So you smelled the liverwurst, and then what happened?" "Oh, I hopped down from the stump and went off towards the smell," said Chester. "Oh, that's very logical," said Tucker Mouse, munching with his cheeks full. "Exactly what I would have done." "Oh, it's coming from a picnic basket," said Chester. "A couple of tuffets away from my stump, the meadow begins, and there was a whole bunch of people having a picnic. They had hard-boiled eggs and cold roast chicken and roast beef and a whole lot of other things besides the liverwurst sandwich that I smelled." Tucker Mouse moaned with pleasure at the thought of all that food. "Well, they were having such a good time laughing and singing songs that they didn't notice me when I jumped into the picnic basket. I was sure they wouldn't mind if I had just a taste," continued Chester. "Naturally not," said Tucker Mouse sympathetically. "Why mind? Plenty for us all. Who do we blame?" Now, I have to admit, I had more than a taste. And as a matter of fact, I ate so much that I couldn't keep my eyes open with being tired. So here we have Chester at the bottom, Tucker at the top. See, Tucker's a lot bigger than Chester. From the jumping and everything, and I fell asleep right there in the picnic basket. The first thing I knew, somebody had put a bag on top of me, and that had the last of the roast beef sandwiches in it. I couldn't move. Well, imagine, trapped under roast beef sandwiches. Well, there are worse fates. Well, at first I wasn't too frightened. After all, I thought they probably come from New Cana or some other nearby town. They'll have to unpack the head and sigh. I could feel the basket being carried into the car and riding somewhere and then being lifted down. That must have been the railroad station. And then I went up again, and there was a rattling and a roaring sound, the way a train makes. And by this time I was pretty scared. I knew every minute was taking me farther and farther away from my stump, but there wasn't anything I could do. I was getting awfully cramped, too, under those roast beef sandwiches. Well, didn't you try to eat your way out? Asked Tucker. I didn't have any room, said Chester, but every now and then the train would give a lurch, and I managed to free myself a little. We traveled on, and then the train stopped. I didn't have an idea of where we were, but as soon as the basket was carried off, I could tell from the noise that it must be New York. Ah, you've never were here before? Tucker asked. Well, goodness, no, said Chester. But I've heard about it. There was a swallow that I used to know who told about the flying over New York every spring and fall on her way to the north and back. But what would I be doing here? And he shifted uneasily from one set of legs to another. I'm a country cricket. Well, don't worry, said Tucker Mouse. I'll feed you liverwurst and you'll be all right. Go on with the story. Well, it's almost over. The people got off one train and walked a ways and got on another, even noisier than the first. Well, that must have been the subway. Well, I guess so, Chester said. You can imagine how scared I was. I didn't know where I was going. For all I knew, they could have been heading from Texas. Although I don't guess many people from Texas come all the way to Connecticut for a picnic. Well, it could happen, said Tucker, nodding his head. Well, anyway, I worked furiously to get loose, and finally I made it. And when they got off the train, I took a flying leap and landed in a pile of dirt over in the corner of this place where we are. Well, such an introduction to New York, said Tucker, to land in a pile of dirt in the Times Square subway station. Tisk, tisk, tisk. And here I am, Chester concluded forlornly. I've been lying over there for 3 days, not knowing what to do, and at last I got so nervous I began to chirp. Ah, that was the sound. I heard it, but I didn't know what it was, interrupted Tucker Mouse. Yes, that was me. Usually I don't chirp until later on in the summer, but my goodness, I had to do something. The cricket had been sitting next to the edge of the shelf, and for some reason, perhaps it was a faint noise, like padded feet tiptoeing across the floor. He happened to look down. A shadowy form that had been crouching silently below in the darkness made a spring and landed right next to Tucker and Chester. Watch out! A cat! And he dove headfirst into the matchbox. That's the end of chapter 3, boys and girls.